Hi, this is a video on the federal deficit versus the federal debt. So you've just watched a video on the federal budget and how we get income from taxes and then we spend money. The government spends money for all the services that we need. And so now we're going to talk about what happens when the budget isn't balanced. So every year there's either going to be a budget surplus or a budget deficit. Okay, a surplus is when you have extra money, wouldn't that be nice? And a deficit is when you have less, you don't have all the money that you need. You're spending more than you're bringing in. Okay, so this graph on the right is showing, I know it's very small, it's from 1970 to about, it's projected up here 2022. It's showing every year whether there was a debt or, whether there was a deficit or a surplus. Deficit means it's negative. All these years have a negative, so the government is spending more than it brings in taxes. There were a few years where there was a surplus and then back to a deficit, and you can see the deficit is getting, larger and staying larger. Okay, so when we talk about deficit, we're talking about a single year. So a single year. When we talk about debt, though, we're talking about the accumulation over time. Okay, so the debt is the total amount owed. By the government. This could be for any country, really, but if we're talking about the U.S., then this is the total amount that the United States is in debt. So look at the second graph here. This is the U.S. gross national debt from 1972 to 2016. So what happens is, well, we have a deficit this year, and a deficit that year, and a deficit that year. We're borrowing more and more and more money. So these bars all stack up. So the bars are stacked up, and this is our total debt accumulating over time. You can see with these bigger ones, it's going up really fast. This is about 2016. Okay, so it's real easy to mess up the debt and the deficit, and I'm still working on getting it straight myself. So the debt is the total amount, and the deficit is just for a single year. Okay, now we have this national debt. We can look at it in two different ways. The first way is what this graph shows. It shows a dollar value of the debt. Okay, so we just talk about the dollar value of the debt. Right now we're at about $20 trillion. That's a lot of money. $20 trillion. The other way is also very important because you might think, well, our country's not quite the same now as it was in 1970 or 72. Our economy has grown a lot. We have a bigger population, bigger economy, and so maybe it's not really fair to compare the national debt in this way, just in the absolute dollar value. So the other way is as a ratio of the economy. So it's called the debt to GDP ratio. I'll talk about GDP in a second. It stands for gross domestic product. So if we take our total debt and divide by the GDP, that is the overall size of the economy, the value of the economy, then we get a percentage. So this one is a dollar value, this one is a percentage. Okay, I have this graph down here, and then we'll write out the gross domestic product. So here we can see the two different ways of measuring it. This is the US, it's all US. This is the gross national debt. this is the debt to GDP ratio. And this is about 1972 would be about right here. So I did put all this on here, but if you're just looking at to compare this graph, this one would start about here. Okay. The picture looks a little different, doesn't it? Especially this shows our economy was bigger, and then this shows it dropped down. A couple little, little recessions and things like that, and then big recessions. Okay, so the gross domestic product, what that is a measure of the size of an economy. And it is the total value of all the goods and services produced. So I want to write out it's the total value of all final goods and services produced by a country. I looked up, so our current debt is about $20 trillion. Our current GDP, the US GDP, well, we're partway through a year, so I looked up the 2016, and that was $18.56 trillion. Okay, so the size of the economy is really big, $18.56 trillion, but the size of our debt is actually larger than that. So this is like, we're underwater here. We are, this is per year though, but the total debt is larger than the complete total amount of goods and services that are produced in the US in 1 year. So that is just an introduction. We'll do some calculations with this, but this is an introduction of the difference between deficit and debt, what the national debt is, how we can measure it as a dollar value or as a percentage of the GDP. We'll also look at what's a good percentage to have of the GDP in debt, and then what the GDP actually is. Okay, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in class.